Welcome to the Lovecars On The Grid podcast, your global motorsport roundup with me, Tiff, Needell and Paul Woodman.
Welcome to Lovecars On The Grid, your global motorsport podcast roundup. It wasn't the busiest of racing weekends, but there's still plenty of action going on. Starting in the UK, we got, what was it in the UK? It was British GTs, which...
and British Superbikes, yeah.
And British Superbikes.
I did forget to tell people last weekend, and we're going to talk about in a minute, about the Japanese Superformula, which is a bit like we haven't really touched the Aussie supercars, which was a brilliant touring car series. We perhaps don't talk about the Japanese Superformula enough, so we'll come to that in a minute.
And we'll come to NASCAR because NASCAR's on every single week of the year.
NASCAR.
Starting off with some Formula One gossip. What have you got for us this week, Tiff?
Well, the thing about Formula One that annoys me is that we all rush into these opening three races. You know, we've waited all winter, and then there's testing, and there's all the car launches. Everyone gets excited and fired up, and then we have three Grand Prix with varying drama, and then all of a sudden, and it's like, well,
I know they're all off. They're all
4 weeks
off surfing and
why do we have a 4 week gap now? And others start the season later. And they have these sort of sessions in the middle of the year with about three Grand Prix on consecutive weekends. It's weird how they work these calendars out. So it's a bit of a.
So you got no gossip. You just got a complaint. Is that what you're telling me?
Yeah, I'm complaining about their calendar because they get us all fired up and then they just leave us. But
you're going to long for it even more. So, what's that about? Absence makes the heart grow fonder.
Yeah.
So you're looking forward to even more when it comes to where's it going next?
Baku, isn't it? Baku,
Azerbaijan.
Baku, yeah. April 28th, April 30th.
Okay, well, I got no gossip really, but I got quite an interesting stat because I know you love stats so much.
Oh.
So Formula One back in the 1950s, there was one red flag. In 1960s, there was no red flags. The 70s, 12. Then it went up to 21 in the 80s, 20 in the 90s. Then it dropped right down to 6 red flags in 2000s. Saved by the bell with your stats. In 2010, there are 12 red flags. There's a bit of a theme here, so it's dropping down. In 2020, so far, with the 3 races, there's been 17 red flags.
But that's in qualifying and everything else, not just in the race.
Well, it can't be in the race, can it? Because it's obviously...
Where have you got this from?
I don't know. Someone gave Twitter.
I told you not to go stat mad.
Do you know what that means? Do you know what this means?
Absolutely nothing.
Exactly. But I've got no Formula One news, and you always want Formula One news, but we haven't got any. So where should we go?
There's quite a bit of debate, wasn't it, about whether Sainz should have had his penalty or not. He was raging about that afterwards. But I tell you what, once they'd all crashed, I just lost interest in who won or who came where. It just because it had become a farce. Go away. Hold on a minute. We can't just middle of go away.
We're so professional on this podcast. Tiff's got his who's calling you? That must be someone important.
I don't know. I couldn't read the number.
Clarkson?
I'm not bothered.
Chris Harris.
You guests out there are more important. Let's get on with our pod.
Okay. Let's go to British GTs then, because it was quite an exciting weekend at Oulton Park.
Oh, it's doing an answer phone, which I can hear.
Why do I hear it? For those who haven't heard it, he is available for voiceovers. He's got the most wonderful voice on an answer phone. Hey, this has been the Needell residence. If you are getting this message, you might want to try my mobile.
We ought to go international first. We all go global first, and we'll come back to the British GTs and the British Superbikes. Because in Japan, because that's got close to my heart. Because Japan became this waiting room. It was called for sort of future Formula One drivers in the 80s and 90s. And I was one of the very first out there to race in Japan in Formula 2, and I went out there in 1979. Finished 4th in my first Formula 2 race out there. Went back in 1980 and another 4th place. And that's what got me into doing my Group C World Japanese Sports Car Championship.
But I thought Japan was more about a waiting room for endurance racing, actually, Tiff. Not
no, very much single seats. I mean, go through the list. You know, I mean, in the 1980s, Jeff Lees won the championship. Stefan Johansson was out there. Ralph Schumacher won the Japanese championship. Pedro de la Rosa won the championship. Andrea Lotterer, that's doing Formula E. Nick Cassidy. So even in single seaters, it was a place to go if you couldn't get a Formula One drive. It was the waiting room, as it was called. And it just came to me because out there last week, it was Liam Lawson. So we haven't had a British driver win for a long time, or a non-Japanese driver. Lawson's obviously a Kiwi. But Red Bull have used the waiting room to good effect. They had Pierre Gasly out there in 2017 when they couldn't find him a job. Red Bull sort of were ignoring Formula 2 back then. So they went to Japan to leave their drivers for a year. And of course, we had Dan Ticktum, not so successful. Gasly made a great success, but Ticktum went out there in 2018-19, didn't get on with it. Pato Award they took from America when they were trying to give Red Bull, thought Pato Award might be their future. Heading back to a couple of races, that didn't really work. And it's been quite quiet since, really. It's been more the Japanese winning the last 2 or 3 years. But Lawson went out and won the first round of the championship, Fuji last weekend, from third on the grid to win it. So I thought, let's get back to Japan. And it's a wonderful place as well. It's a whole different culture. And I so enjoyed racing out there. Very, very different. Living in Tokyo, commuting on the expressways.
What were the most famous tracks? Obviously Fuji, but what other tracks are well known over there?
It's just Fuji and Suzuka, really. They introduced Suzuka, and then they built another Grand Prix track. I always forget its name, but they had a couple of Grand Prix out there, way out in the countryside. So it's quite exciting to see Liam Lawson, because he is, every people are looking for the next Red Bull kid. Then Liam Lawson could well be that man. He came third in the second race, but got a 5-second penalty for. They all came in for the pit stop under the safety car. He did that usual backing up to make space so he could change his tyres as well as his teammates. So he got pinged and finished fourth. So it's growing again. There's 3 other non-Japanese drivers out there. And Giuliano Alesi, again, he's sort of escaped Europe because I think he was getting battered in Formula 3 and Formula 2. Wasn't performing that well. So his dad, Jean, got him sorted out for a Japanese seat about 3 years ago now. In fact, his mother's Japanese. John Alesi's wife is Japanese. And he actually won the sort of the Formula 2 in Japan. I forget what it's called now, but it's called Super Lights or Super something. But he was never that good in F3 and F2. Last weekend, he qualified 18th and finished 19th in race 1. Then he qualified 13th and finished 22nd. I think he had incidents in both races, so not a good weekend from Alesi.
Have you raced against the father? Have you raced against Jean Alesi?
Yeah, he must have been around. Jean, probably a bit after me, wasn't he? I never know. I don't think I've been clashing with him. He runs on a British license, but he's a South African. Raoul Hyman. He did a bit of Formula 3, but he's gone out there to try and further his career. But he only qualified 16th, finished 16th, qualified 21st, finished 18th. And a Turkish driver's gone out there to try and make his mark. Kem Bolukbasi. He was a bit of an e-sports star, I think. And then he went real car racing. Did quite well in Euro Formula, and then he wasn't very good in Formula 2. He qualified 19th. So he finished 8th in the first race somehow, 22nd and finished 17th. So the tradition is growing again a bit, although those last 3 drivers have all probably taken sponsorship money with them to get the drives. Whereas in my day, in the 80s and 90s, there was big money. And Eddie Irvine was another great name. He was very much a star of Japanese Formula 2, as it was then.
I bet he enjoyed it over there.
Yeah, well, he was the one that got all the earnings up. Eddie was very clever with money, old Eddie. And he was one of the ones to get there. You probably learned off Eddie Jordan a lot about earning
and Coulthard.
money.
They're all part of the same sort of gang, really, aren't they? The Monaco gang.
So it's interesting. So we will be following the Japanese Superformula again, because it is a cracking single-seater formula. And now we've got a non-Japanese driver, a Commonwealth driver. That's good enough for me. He's got a bit of a Union flag on his flag, hasn't he? Still, at the moment, he has. I think New Zealand they'll last a bit longer than Australia. So well done, Liam Lawson. Gone to a strange country and won from the top. But that was the only real big international. We come to NASCAR last. We always come to NASCAR last. So really, it was home in Britain. A lot going on in Britain. We've always got a packed calendar which don't follow, because we tend to look at international racing as the way, otherwise we'd be on talking rubbish for hours, wouldn't we? There were truck racing at Brands Hatch. There was historic racing at Donington. Sadly, I wasn't up there. Great weekend for historic lovers.
Well, we're going to be doing some historic racing in June. We're actually going to race against each other with Bernie's V8s at Brands Hatch, the 70s.
Bernie's V8s.
Yeah, that's
going
to be
interesting. There was TCR at Snetterton. Have you ever sort of bothered to watch TCR? I mean, TCR is pretty much what the final World Touring Car Championship was, these front-wheel drive boxes. A lot of fans on Twitter say, oh, no, BTCC is dying a bit. It's come too expensive. TCR is the place to go. But I'm afraid TCR badly fails my rule of thumb that if a formula is only interesting when one car going through a corner in front of you looks exciting. And the trouble, those little front-wheel drive boxes, they understeer through the corners. And of course, it's good excitement because they end up hitting each other a lot. And it tends to be a semi-banger race by the time they got frustrated and start knocking into the back of the car in front. They go broadside, then they floor the throttle, front wheels spin up, they go straight again. I mean, it's sort of entertaining in a sort of banger race scenario, but I can't get excited by it. They're quite expensive cars, quite high tech. So TCR was big at Snetterton. But yeah, British GT up at Oulton Park was the main event. To me, in my mind, that package is becoming very much equal to the touring car package now. There's so much weekend sport. I mean, it's Saturday and Monday, the racing. They missed out Sunday with the British GT up at... they only had qualifying on the Saturday, or the single-seater form, because they got GB3, GB4. The Caterhams, of course, have moved to the BT... Not the Ginettas. The Ginettas have moved from BTCC to the British GT platform. But the race one on this morning, because we're talking Monday, this was Easter Monday, it was a cracking race because they were going, it's very much a pro-am. So you've got to have a pro and the am pays the bills. So, and in the first race, it was the ams that started and the pros that finished the race.
And why did they do that? Just because they're expecting rain, or was that the tactics? Why do they all follow the same suit? Why is that?
Because that's the rule. I quite like it because the ams have a qualifying section. Yeah. And that forms the grid for when the AMs start. And the pros have a qualifying session, which forms the grid for when the pros start. So you always start, where you're supposed to be, which I really liked. But it was the AMs started on wet, sort of drying track and slithered around and did their best. And then the pros got in with some slick stuck on.
There were some good amateurs.
It started racing. Yeah, the AMs they're quick. And of course, it's got GT3 and GT4.
Yeah,
I think it was like 38 cars. It's like 18 GT3s and 18
and it's
GT4s.
Such a small lap around there as well, short lap.
So narrow as well. So overtaken. And they always catch the back markers, local back markers. They catch the leading GT4s before the end of the races. And of course, they don't want to give an inch or half a second. So
I was really surprised at how little they gave in terms of yielding. With it's not a blue flag because they're racing their race.
They're racing. Yeah, but they're still supposed to. Yeah. But at the end of race one, when it started raining in the pros, they all got caught up backing back markers. And then it was virtually 4 cars crossed the line. 1.39 seconds covered the front 4. And there was this famous battle at the front because it was Ross Gunn in the Aston Martin was coming through the pack a bit. The Aston seemed to suit his driving suited it. But Jonny Adam was leading the Merc. He used to be an Aston man. Jonny Adam was very much an Aston man, but he's now moved to a Mercedes this year. But down to Lodge, the final corner, the final lap, they both went straight on. Ross Gunn tried to come both outbraked themselves. Both didn't quite reach the catty litter and sort of teetered round the corner. But third place, Marcus Cluter in the McLaren, was too far back to take advantage. So they still crossed the line in the same order, Jonny Adam.
But I was really surprised because Marcus was so right, pushing. He got into second with only half a lap to go. So
I think the McLaren didn't like the wet so much.
You're right.
Whenever it was wetter, the McLaren didn't seem to have the traction.
Yeah, and we have to say to James Cottingham as well, the amateur for DK Engineering, that's his first ever win, 100th for Adam. So that must be a really good feeling.
Ollie Webb was in. I don't know why he qualified 18th. I don't know what he was. He was slowest.
I was watching
GT3s.
Ollie when he was going through the pack, and I thought he was 17th, and he just stayed at 17th, and sort of it made one place when somebody dropped out. But
maybe he hasn't got a trick
and
McLaren.
Harry George of Caterham fame, where I used to race with Harry in Caterham. So he's in a GT4. And I've got the perfect solution to spice up Formula One, because like the GT3s and GT4s in the British GTs, why don't we just have Formula One and Formula Two on the same track together? So then when you catch them up, you've got all that traffic, all that chaos, because it was chaos. I can't believe how difficult it was to overtake these people.
There was action everywhere, wasn't there? But it's great spectacle. I mean, going around that track in those cars. But the second race wasn't quite, this afternoon's race wasn't quite.
It was a lot wetter, wasn't it?
It was steady, and they had wets on for the whole race. So, but it was, and also the foreign superstars, because as they say, these richer AMs trying to get the best pro. The manufacturers actually have contracted drivers that they donate, as it were, to the AMs in Britain. So at the start, I mean, Jules Gounon, the French guy, disappeared at the start. Raphael Macchiello pulled through to second, another Mercedes. And so they virtually won the race and came second for their men. Jules Gounon was running for Ian Logie, the Scot. Raphael was running for John Ferguson, the Irish driver. And then in third place, it was the German, Martin Kirchhoffen, that helped carry the Mercedes along was Alex West in a McLaren. Swedish drivers, no English drivers there, Irish, Scotland. Those top 6 drivers from France, Italy, Germany, Scotland, Ireland, and Sweden. So it's quite an international thing, British GT now.
Which car do you think looks the best? There's some good-looking cars, aren't there?
And Mercedes. The Mercedes did look the most sure.
You know what looked good? I'm going to be really contentious.
But there was a great battle. I didn't get the names. There was a lovely battle for GT4. 3 McLarens all battling out. The leader was a bit out ahead. The battle for second place went right to the line. So there's always 2 races going on.
I'm going to be a bit contentious, but the M4 BMW, of course, BMW now this new design with this huge grills, but actually really looks good on the GT car.
It did.
Yeah,
I agree.
Really aggressive.
That didn't work in there. They struggled. They qualified quite well, but they struggled a bit in the wet conditions.
Did all right in race 1, 4th place in race 1. So, but that
Joe
was
Osborne did the analysis. Joe never stops talking. He doesn't shout, Joe. But
is he the guy that's quite knowledgeable, but very
not, but just not talks? Yes, just monitor, but just talks non-stop. Breathe, Joe. He was. I don't know how he did it. He jumped from gaps closing to driver's air tubes to traction control, but it just went on and on and on and on and on. But it was a lot about, which I think spoils. If you tell people too much scientific information, I think it takes away some of the romance or drama. They sort of say, well, he's got to turn his traction control's not working as well as the other guy's traction control. And I just want to know pretend it's just the driver that's making the difference. And so I don't know. But
yeah, I quite like getting that bit of inside knowledge. But it was something.
It's too much, Joe. Breathe, Joe.
Bit too much. And you know what I liked as well is the fact that Adam, who drives for Mercedes now, used to drive for Aston Martin. What's his last name? Bush Bell. Won the
Jonny
race first race. Jonny Adam. Sorry, Jonny Adam. Anyway, my knowledge GT drivers are amazing, but I like the fact that when he got out of the car, he said that he wasn't familiar with the Mercedes, so he didn't even know where the windscreen wipers or headlights or anything were when he was trying to turn them on when he was driving. But rookie.
So do go and watch British GT. If you're a touring car fan that just goes to touring car races, just try the British GTs when they come your way, because I think it's very.
Do you know what? There wasn't much argy-bargy. There wasn't that much, because touring cars all the time it's just crash bang wallop, but there wasn't much argy-bargy at all. Plato was in it as well, wasn't he? Your mate
different Plato, yeah, no relation, and no relation Plato. They always talk about that's the only gossip is there's this one seat left in the team. They're talking about Plato might be in it now, so he might become.
Jason Plato.
Wouldn't surprise. No, this could be Jason back to touring cars. I think. Who knows? Anyway, the other was the bikes, of course. Then Silverstone was the bikes. So it was Oulton Park for the British GT opening round, and the bikes on telly again. Because it was good. The British GT, in case you didn't know, was on Sky F1, so you could have. So it was good to see it on mainstream Sky.
It was good, yeah.
Superbikes. What were the Superbikes? They were on some channel as well. But that was always great entertainment. Bikes, because you see the human being on top of it, don't you? It was a bit scary. They did there's this, I don't know what, something cup, the Junior Cup, and they did a whole documentary about this 12-year-old, and he's a midget 12-year-old. They went to his school to interview him, and he won the championship last year. What?
Someone's a midget. I thought
small person. Yeah. No, I know. Well, he was a lovely lad anyway, and he's the star. He won the championship last year, and he crashed and qualified. We didn't hear the story completely. I didn't catch up with the whole story, but he came from 32nd to 3rd in the first race, and was mounting a challenge to win when there was a red flag. Just someone tumbled and was slightly hurt, so they stopped it. And I haven't got his name either, but it was just wonderful to watch these kids, But when he was on the podium, he was half the size. There was a couple of teenagers, big, tall teenagers, and this little tiny lad. He was a superstar for the future.
Brilliant.
Where's
he from, Tiff? Where's the shortest person from? England. Good.
Evan Way. But I ought to get his name because we ought to highlight him sometime. He's in the Youngers Cup. You talk about something for a minute. We'll go to.
So was it on the main Grand Prix track? For the British Superbikes?
No, just on the club segment, which does great racing because it keeps everyone, doesn't it, in one.
I was going to say for motorbike racing, I think that's quite good, isn't it? Because plenty of twists and turns, and it keeps the pack bunched up, I guess. You're determined to get his name now, aren't you? You're looking very dapper.
Talking. You're supposed to be able to carry. You're supposed to carry.
Very dapper, by the way. But I have to say that your football team wasn't looking so dapper.
You don't have to say that. That's completely unnecessary. Well, that's not the way.
They're going to be out of the Premiership. In the championship, so
it's not the way to to a talent cup, the R&G Talent Cup. And the kid is called, and he's on this Vision track. You know, when we watch the kids doing Moto3, this Vision track team?
Yeah.
That's not the right name. Oh, come on. Don't do that to me.
Well, Tiff Needell, ex-Formula One racer and Le Mans.
I'm sure it's the Talent Cup
Le Mans competitor. Had a podium once at Le Mans. It was last ever time you went to Le Mans, wasn't it? Was it?
Jonny Garnes. You're the kid. Jonny Garnes. We're going to remember the name.
He's not a kid. He's a young man. Be careful what you say. Jonny Garnes.
I always love when women talk about women's football. They always talk about the girls.
Careful.
No, but they always talk about the girls. They call them girls and girls and girls and girls and girls. I don't know. Anyway, Jonny Garnes, you're a star.
I know where you're going with that, and it's yeah.
So anyway, back to
no. Because you got to answer my question.
What was that?
When you got on the podium at Le Mans, your 14th time, was that the final time you ever did Le Mans?
No, I did about 3 or 4 more after that.
Okay.
So the big bikes, yeah, but again, great racing. I mean, I've just got the results, and it was just never-ending action. And the British, an English guy, Kyle Ride, won the first race. Two races, obviously. One on Saturday, one on Friday, one on Saturday, one on Sunday. Kyle Ride and Yamaha, who was he finished 6th, I think, last year. He was a teammate for the champion last year. He's in that Rich Energy Yamaha. Josh Brooks, who's now 39 years old. He's moved to BMW. The bike had a great colour scheme, and he's twice been a champion. He hasn't won for about 2 years, I don't think. So he was delighted to come second, and then he won the next race, which we'll get to. I'm jumping the gun. He won the second race, and then Northern Ireland's Glenn Irwin came third in the first race. And he's in my new favourite bike, because all it's got written all over its Ducati fairing is beer. Just says beer.
That's very clever marketing, isn't it? And so now I'm going to ask you, who is the beer sponsor?
Ducati team. I've Googled them now so we can advertise. They could well sponsor this. They could, couldn't they? I mean, if they gave you a little couple of beers, they could sponsor this podcast.
Who is it?
They're a beer distributor, so you can buy on Tinternet any sort of beer from them.
That's really clever advertising, isn't it? Because they're not allowed to advertise the actual brand, the beer brand,
just called
alcohol,
beer.
But they're allowed to advertise the word beer. That's brilliant. I love that.
So I haven't got down who won the other races. Who won the second race?
But you know,
those are the 3 winners. Sorry, those are the 3 winners. I'm killing my own notes are killing me now. The 3 winners from the 3 races were Kyle Ride, Josh Brooks, and Glenn Irwin. And Brooks leads the championship. Tommy Bridewell is second in the championship after all the points. He had 2 second places in the third. He's Glenn Irwin's teammate in the beer monster Ducati team. And then Irwin is third in the championship and Ride is fourth. So 3 different manufacturers winning races. So all bodes well for another cracking year of British Superbikes.
Brilliant. Where are they off to next, you know?
Oh, just have to look at my brilliant calendar already. See, this is what it takes. This is
for those of you that can't see, he is such a geek, and I love him for it, because he's got every single major racing event on his clipboard that he's now reading.
British, you come to Silverstone on April the 9th. We come down here, we find it's Oulton Park on April the 30th. Oulton Park, April the 30th.
How much preparation work did you used to do when you were commentating with Murray Walker?
No, a lot more than this. Pages. Well, Murray was the master. Murray had everything, so it was much simpler. I just had to follow Murray, but it was. I mainly went on recognition. That was the hardest thing, you know. They are amazing commentators. I mean, Crofty, I've got to give him credit. The way he can pick out the cars and the colours, when I think they're all the same nowadays.
I think a lot of the time you're going with the helmets, aren't you? With a lot of the Formula One drivers.
Yeah.
Big respect. Even Cheesy on with the Caterham commentary. You know, he knows all the drivers. He knows what they do, and he knows little snippets about all of them. It's not just turning up on a Saturday and sprouting out a few words.
No. Not a very big crowd at bikes, though. I mean, at Thruxton, I think touring cars gets bigger than bikes, about similar. But at Silverstone, didn't look a big crowd, but so much action going on. Great.
Speaking of not very big crowds, it wasn't a very big crowd at Southampton yesterday either, actually, or Saturday. Whenever
it was a full house.
Was it? There were loads of empty seats on the telly.
Only at the end.
Yeah, when you're 4-1 down, 10 minutes to go. Cheerio, cheerio, cheerio.
Quite a lot of state. The biggest evacuation was West Ham when they were getting beaten 4-1 at home by somebody. Of course, I've never seen such an empty stadium. No, yeah, that wasn't very good. Anyway, so moving quickly on,
NASCAR.
just to finish off, late last night, I had to confess, I watched it this morning on Times 30. It was a dirt race at Bristol Speedway. It was spectacular. I told you to watch it. Did you watch it? No.
Yeah, but you didn't watch it. You watched it on Times 30. That's not watching, is it?
Well, I watched most of it, at times normal, and then sped up a bit and go through yellows. But it was just, I mean, there were times in the race where there were 5 of them 3 wide, overtaking 2 wide, and they do this dive bomb. What's it called when you go inside when you come up the inside, then shoot up in front of them? You know that bikes do it in Speedway and stuff, where you dive down the inside and you shoot up in front of them. Lots of that going on. You either took the high line or the low line, the middle line. Just overtaken all the time. And
so was there dust everywhere? I know they dampen it down, and it's getting.
No, it didn't get too dusty. They did a great job of the track, and because as long as you get the sort of rubberized black strip on top of the clay early on before it gets too dry, then the sort of tire grip holds it. And there were some great bits that broke up, huge lumps. So they had to go either above it or below it, or put wheels each side. There were sections that had sort of got huge cracks and lumps. And it is bizarre to watch these, 200-mile-an-hour Daytona things go broadside round dirt, 60, 70, 100 miles an hour. But it was amazing. It was good to watch. Unfortunately, the slight drawback is that certain number 5, the great Carl Larson, who led from the start to the first, finished the first stage easily, he was going to cruise it. But this is what's always great about NASCAR, because you don't have to stop at the end of the first stage when the yellows come out.
Yep.
And about 6 cars stayed out. So they then started the second stage ahead of Larson, who was now 7th. And he got boxed in, made bad moves, had a bit of trouble. Then he banged into the 41 car of Ryan Preece. Preece was trying to edge alongside him, and the guy Larson moved up, just touched Preece. I didn't think it was that, not being biased at all about the 5. But Preece hit the wall. So then Preece was on the radio moaning, I'm not going to do this anymore. And his spotter was saying, well, you know what you got to do, what goes round comes round, all that sort of, you knew there was tension in the air. Could he? Anyway, Preece had more trouble and dropped right to the back of the pack. So we thought, he's gone, we won't see him. Larson was now battling like mad. And then we had a restart. He restarted about 6th, and then halfway through the next stage, he had a spin on his own. Shows how tricky it is. The great Carl Larson can spin on his own, which dropped into the back of the pack, where he was then happened to be alongside the number 41 of Ryan Preece. And Larson must have known what was coming, but he went to go round the outside of Preece high, and when they were alongside, Preece just shoved him up into the wall. And then they came back down again. That was the exiting sort of turn 4, I think it was. Then they came down the straight, and then Larson seemed to come down into Preece because he says his car was broken and he couldn't control it. Anyway, so that was Larson out of the race. In the end, Larson was fairly sort of, well, I guess he was retaliating, and Preece was very prickly, saying these big superstars, they can't push and shove us around. Anyway, amongst all that drama for lovers of the number 5, Carl Larson, Christopher Bell, who was the one person Carl Larson said is better than him, because they grew up both doing dirt midgets. So Larson's had so many races against Bell on the dirt for years and years and years. So Christopher Bell came through, and he pulled out quite an easy lead after the last restart to with a Toyota with Tyler. And Tyler Reddick got close, and the last lap was closing in another Toyota. So loads of action in NASCAR on the dirt, entertaining. And that was all of the weekend. There was still a lot of motorsport going on, as always, but not the big names that people only seem to want to know, which is why we're here with our podcast, to open your eyes to other motorsports. That's great to watch. And
if you are listening or watching from a different country, I know most of our listeners are probably celebrating Easter somewhere, but that's why it's over Fridays and Mondays this weekend, because it's our Easter weekend in the UK. So what have we got to look forward to next week, Tiff?
Oh, big again. So going big again. After a weekend off, the greatest thing is World Endurance Championship at Portimao. We've got this whole new generation of hypercars around that amazing Portimao track. Wow,
yeah.
So really looking forward to that.
IndyCar. Ferrari favourites, or who's
well, no, still good? Probably Toyota will always be favourites. I think this year, they've got so much more experience.
Ryan Cullen, he'll be out there.
Ferrari the base. He'll be in his LMP2.
Yep.
Yeah, IndyCar at Long Beach was always spectacular, overtaking very hard, but still a great spectacle. Watch those IndyCar boys around Long Beach. And the same weekend, on the Saturday normally, is the IMSA sports cars, which are the same hypercars as that we're racing in Portimao. So IMSA sports cars on the Saturday, IndyCar Long Beach on the Sunday, and then MotoGP. I'd say it's all happening at Koto, the track that I thought maybe NASCAR shouldn't go to. And I don't think MotoGP should go there either. Because, there's only sort of 17 or 18 of them, and they look so small. That's the trouble with these tracks. When you have that tarmac runoff on both sides of the circuit, there's a little strip and you've got a wide shot, they just seem to get lost.
But Silverstone's got that, but it gets away with it because the bikes they go on.
It doesn't. I don't think Silverstone Grand Prix circuit, the bikes look that good. They need sort of something that makes it a little more dangerous, almost something that's a bit closer to give you that sensation of speed and the fragility, being on a motorbike. And so I was thinking about this moving grandstands miles away is another problem. I think the spectators. I think when I grew up, I was clinging to a fence, and Sterling Moss and Jim Clark, they were 10 feet away from me, and I could always look and see the dials on their rev counters as they went past me. And when you sit, especially the old start finish straight, which was the finish straight for British Superbikes on the national circuit, they've moved the gravel trap's about 100 yards wide, and it's almost only after the kink of Woodman. I know, but I think
look at Australia, there was quite a bit of carbon fibre went into the crowd, didn't it? But
got over the fence.
Tiff, tell us about your racing this year. What have you got coming up other than Bernese on the 17th
this weekend? That's what I was going to get to after MotoGP. The next race is Goodwood members meeting next weekend.
There, cheering you on.
The place to be. I'll be out in a Ford Cortina in the Jim Clark trophy race, it's called. And this is the one race where they have all the professional drivers and celebrity drivers sharing.
Can I tell you, in the press pack, I don't know whether you've seen it, but in the press pack, your name is first in that. As all the esteemed drivers, your name is first. How about that?
That's nice.
Yeah. Well, you've been going there. You haven't missed one, have you? So
no, done everyone, because April 7th was the anniversary of Clark's death, sadly. Yeah. So we're all thinking about Jim Clark last Thursday, Friday.
Just to clarify, he is your hero racing
ultimate
driver.
Hero. I mean, and he will always be. I think because he was such a gentleman and such a talented driver, and because I saw him racing a Formula One race and then a saloon car race and then a sports car race all the same weekend. So I saw him race so many cars just in one weekend sometimes, and because he was so good. So he was, and he never used his car as a battering ram like certain other. You talk about either Senna or Schumacher. Sadly, they're flawed geniuses. I always say, as Clark would never dream of pushing someone else off the road or even bumping into them. NASCAR will be out of course. They'll go from a half a mile of dirt to a half a mile of tarmac or concrete at Martinsville. So they'll continue hitting each other all weekend. Massive amount of sport next weekend.
And what other racing you got lined up for this season?
Well, only Goodwood at the moment. Nothing else. I might be doing another old historic race, and then of course there's the Chevrolet Corvette anniversary race.
70 years of Corvette.
Might not be on my calendar yet.
Get it on there with Bernie's V8. And what about your Formula Ford?
What date have you got? A date for me?
17th of June. Will your Formula Ford get a? Will that get a?
I don't know. No, my Formula Ford's in the garage at the moment, and I got crashed last time when I got hit by someone else.
I was there. It was Castle Coombe.
No, Castle Coombe. No, I'll get it out again, but I've got to redo the fire extinguisher. These petty regulations drive me mad, because I've got
to say that if it saves your life, are you?
I met a man from the MSUK down testing at Goodwood last week. I saw he had the badge on him. So to me, that's a red rag to a bull. So I laid into him. Firstly, with those new track limits, are they really going to introduce this 1 second penalty for half a wheel over a white line? Which I'm not sure has been introduced or not yet. And then after that, they asked me, am I going to race my Lotus? And I said, well, I've got to go and let off my fire extinguisher and have it refilled. And I asked him, when in the history of Formula Ford racing since 1967 has a fire extinguisher ever put out any fire on a Formula Ford? Yeah. It's just spending for... We have to wear the neck harness, which I don't like. You have to buy one of those. They're about £500 now on their good one. It's just...
Hands
devices, the stuff they make you have, which I think should be advisory. We suggest you have a neck, we think, medically. Yeah. I don't.
I get you on that fire extinguisher. Like you say, when is the last time one ever...
And the seat belts. I think it's 4 or 5 years. I've got like this brand new seatbelts that'll do about 8 races, and I have to throw them away.
But surely somebody out there that does fire extinguishers is going to listen to this and say, "Oh, okay, well, this is Tiff, and this is his racing. We'll do one, and we'll give it a mention on the podcast and in the video."
You're listening, Steve. Calling Bald Eagle Steve down at the Castle Combe shop. Calling Steve, Castle Combe.
You got no chance with him. No. Thanks for watching as always. See you next week.
All the best.
Happy Easter.
Happy Easter, a frantic weekend. Cheers.
See you.